right. Hello, hello. It's great that I start and everybody leaves, but that's cool. Yes, my name is Bauer. I'm for Plan A Collective, and I would like to talk a little bit about how to create a vision, pillars, and direction. It's a common topic in the industry, at least where I come from, but this time I wanted to get a little bit of a personal perspective on it, and I try to make it as practical as possible. So you will very likely see a lot of text, sorry for that, but I don't want it to have a very academic talk or philosophy, anything like that. I rather try to have something which you guys can actually use. And if it's very similar to what you guys have, then it's fine. In the worst case, we can have a conversation about it and we enrich our knowledge. I mean, that's kind of the reasons why we're here. All right, what I will talk today about, I talk a little bit about myself. I try to keep it short. Then we talk about vision, pillars, direction, a little bit of a summary at the end, and then hopefully we still have some time for some questions. All right, about myself. I'm not going to bore you to death with everything I did before. The only thing I can tell you right away, I didn't go to university. I did a lot of role-playing games. I kind of ruined almost my high school exam with making too much levels. I was big in the mod community back in the days, early 2000s, end of 90s. So yeah, that is my origin story. Now, professionally, as it already said, I worked on FarCry 1, Crysis Warhead, Rise before it became Rise, so codename Kingdoms. Then I joined Ubisoft as a director for Splinter Cell Blacklist, worked on FarCry Primal, FarCry 5, FarCry 6. You spot a pattern there. And now I'm the creative director for Plan A Collective. The reasons why it's yellow is not just to pimp my CV, but the topic today is a lot about leadership, and I wanted to highlight the areas where I was actually in a leadership or director position. So that started around 2007, if I'm correct. The other stuff I'm doing is I'm writing my own role-playing games. I do a lot of projects. I did school projects for art stuff. I talk at multiple universities, DAE and Harvard, panel speaker for Disney, and so on. I run multiple YouTube channels. They're very inactive right now because the one thing I'm currently doing as well is I'm finally writing a book about level design. So Corona actually had something good for once, so I had enough time. It's called Practical Guide to Level Design. Hopefully it will come out next year. Shamelessly, I'm announcing it here, world premiere, you're welcome. So yeah, you just buy it all, like 10 copies next year, please. All right, the last thing I want to talk about myself. This is a bit of I think I stole it from Abstract from Netflix, one of the first episodes. And I think this guy also stole it from someone, I forgot the name. But it essentially means artists wait for inspirations, designers go to work. So when I said I want to do something practical, I don't want to inspire you with some weirdly a lot of big pictures, but something you can actually apply on a day-to-day basis, because everything else, I've been to multiple talks where people talk about the great design process of opening a room or a shop without any purpose, and they ask the customer what the shop should be about, and it made no sense at all. So I tried to do something a bit of different today. All right, let's go out with a vision. So, what is a vision? Just to be all on the same page. It's an idea or spark. That's the initial beginning of everything. It's a motivational, inspirational tool. And most importantly, it triggers emotion. Especially when you talk about the motivational part. If it doesn't really inspire the people in this room with your vision, you did something very wrong. That's kind of the point of a vision. It's short. I have seen vision documents, PowerPoint presentation went over 20 pages and people forgot the middle and the end and everything else just because it was so long. A vision has to stuck in your mind. That's very, very, very important. And it's not a design description. The amount of people try to squeeze in all their great design ideas because they're the biggest designers on the planet in their vision, yeah, that doesn't work because it's not really inspiring. And most importantly, and this is for both the pillars and the direction and again the vision, it can be for multiple things. It can be for your entire game. It can be for your level. It can be your art direction, art vision. It can be all the big parts and the small parts and everything in between. So why do we need a vision? Ultimately, it's the foundation for everything else you create from then on. That's why it's so important. Everything is building on it. It's your foundation for your entire game. If you have a really crappy foundation, your house will crumble. Now, same with your game and a vision. So for whom do we actually create a vision? This is potentially a bit controversial, but in my last 20 years, the most important thing which matters for your vision is the people who pay you. Yes, we are still in a business to some extent, and we'd still like to pay our bills, so if we can't get money, it's pretty bad. We kind of want money, and we kind of need money to make games, just to be fair. Next up, the people who make the game. The people who make the game don't believe in your vision. What's the point? I mean, we leaders, we believe we are the ones creating the games, but no, the people on the floor create the game. They sit in the trenches. We might send them to battle and let them do all these things, but the developers have to make the game. They're the most people. I mean, if you're a one-man team, good for you. But I came from a project with 1,000 people. That's a little different story in that regard. So yeah, and I also worked in a lot of games where the people didn't believe in the vision and it didn't went well. They didn't show up my CV. And lastly, you have to kind of inspire the people with your vision, the people who buy it, because then you don't get more money for the next project and you run out of the developers. So yeah, and I think we all know games which got a crap ton of money. The developers were excited, and then nobody bought it. Maybe because it's ahead of time, or the marketing was crap, something along those lines. But those three people really need to believe in your vision. Otherwise, something will go terribly wrong. All right, let's start with how do we actually create a vision. And this is not a magic recipe, this is just a basic guideline, and you can break the rules as much as you want to. But for me, I like to just write it down. Write down all your ideas, just a big blob. And I don't worry about the length. I said it should be short, and we'll come about this in a second. Give me a few minutes. But most importantly, what excites you personally? If you have to sell your vision and you don't get excited about it, don't write it down. And yeah, I mean, the speaker before me, Jan, already talked about the unique selling point. Yeah, what actually makes your game unique? That has to be part of what makes you exciting. If you make the most generic action shooter again, shouldn't be your first step. And then I'm kind of foreshadowing already the next step, but it's okay already to trim a little bit. Focus on the essential parts. If you make a shooter and you have to explain you can shoot a gun in your vision, even in your first bloop statement, you're kind of wasting a little bit of time. And it makes the next step a little bit easier. And this is the reduction part. As I said, should be short. So compress and reduce as much as possible. So ideally, we're going down to a vision which you can present in 20 to 30 seconds, like your short elevator ride. If I have to give you a vision for 2 hours, you will not be inspired except you have insomnia. Next one, reduce everything which is descriptive in your vision. Because again, it's not a design document. Again, focus on the emotion because you want to inspire people. You want to get them really gelled up about it. One thing which really kills everything is long lists. Like, it includes cars and planes and tanks and guns and this. This shouldn't be part of your vision statement. If you list more than 2, 3 things in a row, again, you probably very likely bore people to death. And last but not least, even if you're the greatest leader and design superstar on the planet, leave some room for the devs to fill it out. Who want to work on a vision where everything is already spilled out in detail? Then you basically become a drone. That's not cool at all either. All right, next step, let's make it fancy. So I would normally then start refining individual worlds to make it a bit more elaborate. Use a thesaurus. This is a great hint, which I can only give you. It works wonders, especially if you're not a native speaker like myself. With those changing of words, the important thing is they should be more impactful and they should manage expectations. If we say it's going to be the biggest MMO on the planet and you will rival World of Warcraft, you better back it up or you manage your expectations rather. Please avoid buzzwords. The next synergy, enlightenment and whatnot, I mean, you guys know the corporate bullshit bingo list probably better than me by now. Avoid them because it can drive some people really, really nuts, and no, I hint at you, don't do that, please. Probably one of the most important things is speak it out loud and refine it multiple times. If you can't say it smoothly, you can't present it in an elegant way, and that can lose you some points. So really rehearse and rehearse and rehearse your vision. Now, we talked about how do we establish it. I mean, again, it's not a magic formula, but those are basically my basic steps. But how do you use the vision? Well, the first one obviously is quite easy. You use it to pitch, right? I mean, that's the whole point. You need to inspire a big room. Yeah. But the most important thing, and this is what often forgotten is, especially in longer game development, frequently gauge your work against the vision. After like a year or two, you might realize, wait a second, what we're actually doing is not our vision anymore. And then we're starting to have inconsistency in our product. So if it doesn't fit anymore, either go back and change the vision or change your work. And this reality check from time to time is crucial. Otherwise, you create some creative clusterfucks, and that's not cool either. We've been all in those projects, I guess. At least I was. So a few elements of how I typically go and look for some visions. I do my research. You would be surprised how many games either had a gigantic amount of vision. I mean, Ubisoft projects, especially the big FarCrys, they're famous for these. They make elaborate trips all around the world, make huge world bibles, gigantic photo ops. It's great, but also been to games, I'm not going to say which one's on my game list. We essentially did the entire world based on Google image research. It works for some games, but if it's based on a realistic idea and you've never been to that place, it's a little bit iffy. Next up, I ban everything which is common and generic. So I had level design tests in the past, and people still did the next average gas station and trailer park, even though we told them don't do generic. So really ban these words out of your vocabulary if you want to create something which is a cool and unique vision. This is my personal thing. I favor on the niche, the obscure, the fringe. If it's some weird bondage club in the underground of Berlin, that's way cooler than going to the Brandenburger Gate again. At least that excites me, not the BDSM part, but just the fringe part. You can add layers to your vision, but there are limits to it. So you have a generic church. Cool, you can put a math lab in the basement. That's a cool layer. But you then also have a techno club, a right-wing fascist propaganda tower on top, and an eccentric artist with graffiti around it, and maybe someone who has ants farm in the garden, in the graveyard. You had so many layers to it that you essentially create brown sauce. So like all the watercolors together, and the player can't recognize them anymore, nothing stands out anymore, and you can't sell it. And that's not cool. But a few layers, one or two, can make something generic, something boring, and sometimes we have to have those things, like a church. It's not a new thing in games. Pretty cool and unique. So again, limits, please. I've done some horrible things. Last but not least, I know there's always some type A people in the room who think they're the biggest guys on the planet and they can reinvent the wheel. But no, actually working in a team is actually quite a nice thing. Like, it don't have to be a committee of 20,000 people, but just like 2-3 people, and refine your vision, refine your idea in a team, especially in a very diverse team, you can really dig out some really cool ideas. So yeah, I highly recommend all those elements to get cool, unique, and creative ideas for your vision. Oops, I'll be right back. Okay. All right, quick summary about the vision. A vision is short. It's your primary creative foundation. It's for everything else. Doesn't want to crumble. It has to have an emotional impact. It has to really inspire people, get them excited. And it is used to pitch and gauge your product along the lines. That's actually very, very important, especially the gauge part, which a lot of people will forget. All right, pillars. What are pillars? Just that we're all on the same page. Ideally, it's like 2-3 words per pillar, or yeah, maybe it's just one. It's actually quite nice too, which describe your product. Product, again, can be your game, your level, something along art direction, and so on. It manages expectations. And it is, again, still not descriptive by purpose, because we still want to leave room for our developers. The way I like to compare pillars is like if you have a painting. You have a cool idea for a painting, which is your vision. But then your pillars essentially are your composition. It's not your painting, it's your underlining skeleton about your game or your product level and so on. And most importantly, the pillars are based on your vision. If the pillars contradict your vision, something went wrong along the lines. Because again, the pillars are supporting the vision, which again is the foundation for everything else. All right, how do we use our pillars. I think this is the breakthrough, at least in my head, in my beginning of my career, of how to actually use those pillars. Because we always had these presentations by some well-paid directors, and these are the 3 pillars, like exploration, purpose, and time travel. Okay, those are 3 pillars, but how do we use it? So essentially, it's a self-check tool for our developers to check any new idea against the pillars. The more pillars fit to your idea, very likely this idea better fits the original vision which the pillars are based on. It's a self-check tool, as I said. And the great thing is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, people can do this by themselves in small groups. They don't always have to run to the lead or director to get the ideas approved. Very likely, the idea fits if it fits to the pillars. That is the cool tool aspect of the idea of pillars. Ultimately, it establishes a very base consistency, because the more things fit to the pillars, they will fit to the vision, and again to your foundation of your game. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's kind of the point of it. So how do we create pillars? It's actually pretty simple in theory, because we just have to find some words which define our vision, right? That sounds very simple. But because it's not very simple, I recommend you to actually look not just at the vision, but also at the original ideas. You probably had examples, you had inspiration for your game, or for your art, or for your game design. Look there as well, because they kind of came to the vision and ultimately at the very end. Look in your beginning blob, which I described as step 1 to create a vision. There's a lot of interesting ideas, very likely already there, which help you to create the pillars which describe your vision just with a few words. Some pillars, like in the example I gave you, like the exploration, purpose, and time travel, it's just a flavor element, but it's a very defining element about your game. Not every idea will fit to time travel, but maybe exploration and purpose will, so we still have the majority of the pillars are being matched. And that's still quite good. So the other important thing is there needs to be a balance between how strict and restricting and suffocating the pillars are compared to how much freedom there is. If a composition is a blank piece of paper, you probably don't give enough restriction. But if the composition essentially is the entire painting, almost just a pencil drawing, then you probably did it too limiting for the developers to still find their little niches in between and come up with cool ideas. All right, now I know this is a little bit philosophical, but now let's go back to some more practical approaches of how to create pillars. Pillars have to help the developers. For example, fantasy is a bad pillar because there's epic fantasy, there's horror fantasy, there's dark fantasy, there's all kinds of fantasy variants. So at least be a little bit descriptive to trim things down a little bit to help the developers who ultimately have to create it. Pillars have to be clear. We had some fancy writers who came up with the most obscure English words, with most international people in the room had no idea what he was talking about. And then we had to look up in dictionaries what the pillar means, and that shouldn't be the case. The pillar should be clear for everyone in the room. Pillars should not be too precise, because again, we don't want to be too limiting. For example, I never heard about the pencil. It's obscure, it's limiting, it's weird. Don't do those kind of pillars, please. A single pillar is short, not a sentence or even longer. Again, people have to remember the pillars. It's a self-check tool. People always have to check up the wiki whenever they have an idea, just to remember the pillars. Again, something went probably wrong. I recommend 3 to 4 pillars, not more. Again, people will not remember many, many pillars during their day-to-day work in the office or at home. I worked on 2 games. One had 9 pillars, and the other one had 13 pillars. To surprise, one of them was cancelled, and the other one is already in his 4th reboot. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are, and I was not the one creating the pillars, but yeah, don't do that. It's meant to be a self-check tool for developers. They have to remember, they have to breathe it, they have to believe in it. So yeah, keep it short, inspiring, and helpful, and supportive. And last but not least, this was a fun one. We had one game which had the pillar accessible and fun. Guess what? How many games do you know out there who don't want to be fun or accessible? So avoid the obvious in your pillars. Focus on the things which really make your game stand out. Yeah, we had, of course, ditched those pillars because we had a bit of an argument with that design person. So yeah, focus on the ones which make your game stand out and skip all the obvious ones. All right, summary about pillars. We want to have a few pillars, because we remember them, each of them very short. It's based on your vision, your foundation. It's a self-check tool for developers. Last but not least, it needs to strike a balance between giving people enough freedom, your developers, and still at the same time give them a clear composition so they're set up for success. All right, direction. It's a bit of a longer one. Bear with me, please. First of all, why do we need a direction? This is a ranger. It looks very convincing. So, first of all developers should have the same orientation. They should go with the same speed. And they should stay kind of close together. We don't want to leave people behind. We don't want them walk in different directions. And that's the kind of the point, why do we have a direction? If we don't do that, the problem is everybody interprets the vision differently. Again, as I said, it's not descriptive. It's not a design document, your vision. Therefore, we now need the direction to bring it all a little bit together. And if we don't do this, we get an incoherent mass chaos and unclarity. I want to believe a lot of us in this room worked on such projects. At least I certainly did. Therefore, I was more and more invested in actually coming up with ideas of how we can create actually a proper direction which helps all of us and sets up the project for success. Because if we don't do that, we get that. Micromanaging, lots of changes, waste, and frantic behavior. Again, I'm not going to go through all my CVs, but that is often a result. And I was in many interviews with level designers or designers, and they all told me the same thing. The last thing they want is to work on another project where there's a crap ton of micromanaging, a lot of waste, gets rebooted 3-4 times, or gets canned at the end anyhow. Therefore, we need a good direction. All right, what is a good direction? So, a good direction achieves a consistent product. That's the obvious one. It's applicable and easy to understand. If I need a dictionary or a 2-hour speech just to understand each page of my direction, again, we did something wrong. Remember, not everybody's a native speaker, not everybody has the same level of background and so on. So the understanding is absolutely important. It needs to be very easy. The goal is that everybody works towards the same goal at a similar pace. Again, we don't want to leave people behind. We don't want that people who crunch all the time are way ahead of everybody and then blame everybody by being slow and whatnot. No, a direction should get people together and inspire them. It also motivates them if you're not around. If you are a leader, director, whatnot, and you go to vacation and you check your emails all the time and secretly spy on Slack, you might not have the best direction on the planet or the confidence in your team, or probably both. So I like to have a direction where I can go to vacation and enjoy it. Next one is actually quite important. If people don't believe in the direction of your game, well, then they don't put out all this hard sweat and tears into the product. I worked in really amazing games, and I worked my ass off, and I didn't mind it because I really believed in it. And that was cool and inspiring. And then I worked on games where I couldn't wait to go home. So that's the difference in a good direction and a bad direction. And we kind of want to be surrounded by people who believe in the product we both developed and created a direction for. Last but not least, the better the direction, the less often it changes. So I heard horror stories, the direction changes every weekend when the CEO went with his son to the pancake house and got a new idea or watched a new movie and a new game came out, and every time the game changed. No, a good direction stands and is stable. We'll talk about changes in a second or a minute, but stability is a premise for a good direction. So when do we create the direction? So ideally, because the direction is based on practical use, it's a practical applicable tool, we actually create it during pre-production. You need to have a little bit of experience with practical applying your vision, your pillars, maybe a few hints and pieces of direction here and there, of course. But ideally, it's based on practical experience because it should be a practical, applicable tool. But set the expectations that even in pre-production, some parts of a direction will change because the whole point of pre-production is that we actually produce more and we learn more. And more about a little bit of how we create a direction in a second, but then you hopefully understand that concept. Once you have something practical, which is based on your experience, You can still massage it later on. Once again, as I said, things settle in a little bit, like beginning of production and sometimes even around alpha, but getting a bit tight at that moment. All right, how do we make a direction? So the reasons why you see that picture here is, this is from my YouTube channel, advertising, please, everybody subscribe. It's very inactive right now because of the book, but you can go ahead. And this is from a picture which I created. It's a co-op, open world level design direction. I presented it on that channel. And it's based on, primarily on a lot of mistakes the level designers have done. I based the majority of that direction on the mistakes. So, as I said, the very first step for a direction, because it's practical, write down the mistakes the team has done. But then reword it so you actually make it to something positive. For example, the team always puts the cover too tight together, always forgets the flanking routes. Well, then you make a direction. Every combat space should have at least 1, 2, 3 flanking routes. It's a fair statement, right? Because imagine the team makes no more mistakes. It's a dream, right? If your direction prevents all the mistakes the team could do or has done in the past, that's a really good start. At least it makes me exciting. Next one up, because I said direction should slowly evolve, especially during pre-production. Observe what the team has done. Because a lot of times people come up with the craziest ideas. I worked on a project for 2.5 years where the core idea was actually developed as an accident by a junior level designer. It's great. Great ideas come from strange places. So especially when the team is a little bit more open, can do prototyping, brainstorming, a lot of cool ideas come up there. This is a really good foundation for coming up with a direction. Again, because it's practical and applicable. And those good directions, just add it to your direction sheet for now. Don't have to be the final one, but we're getting there. Next one up is your personal vision. I know some type A people in this room might want to start with this. No, start with the mistakes, start what the team has done, because the team has to apply it. Therefore, we're going now to your own vision, finally. So, there's also quite important thing. You supposedly be in a higher up position because, well, you have experience in your craft, right? So it's perfectly fine to add a few things from your own personal experience, from things which went wrong in your past, to add there. I mean, I don't have experience with match 3 mobile games. I wouldn't want to create this vision for that, but for bigger games and action games, I have a lot, so I can put experience there. Other important thing at that moment, there's a lot of outside components which tie into your direction. It often come from creative limitations, technical limitations. Marketing has a lot of ideas sometimes, which is good or bad. Or some various other sources which are requirements from your, Next up, what I really like, and this is a little bit my own pet thief OCD pattern, is I like to fill in basically a Sudoku field. I give you an idea. You might have a good direction of how to place attack dogs and sniper AI in a level. And then you have another direction based on the previous steps of how the player should engage shotgun and grenade guys. But wait a second, if I just look at those two elements, I realized, wait a second, I don't have a direction for how people should design shotgun and grenade guys or how the players should approach attack dogs and snipers. What is their counter to this pattern? Simply because I created a grid and I filled out the little gaps in between by Sudoku. At least that's in my head that works. The important thing is that you don't just look at this little AI example I see, but the more you can understand the totality of your product and create a bigger pattern, and sometimes a very small pattern, but establish those kind of patterns, that is what the most important thing is in order to find the empty grid pieces which you still need to fill out to create a big picture. Next one, we put it on paper. I prefer to do it on a very graphical format because in the game industry, a lot of them are very visual-driven people. At least that's my idea. I already have talked about patterns, so we start putting those on paper. Maybe I spot patterns by actually putting them on paper. I try to prioritize things. I try to establish an order between the different ideas. I compartmentalize it, because then again, the more smaller the elements become, the more I see maybe relationship between them, which I can help to create a graphical concept. And designers like loops, so that's why we also look for loops, anything which repeats in our product. What I love to do is I love to put this direction for the various elements on a huge piece of paper. Every bigger office should have a plotter so we can print it on the wall, because then people can walk by being reminded about it. Plus it kind of looks cool. It makes this whole thing look more like a game dev studio if you actually have a cool, colorful direction on the wall. I've seen worse things on walls in game dev studios, so compared to that, that's actually quite cool. In a design document, or the direction document rather, it's okay to have some explanation. We're not anymore in the phase where we need to pitch things don't need to be short. We're now in the stage where some explanation to go a bit more in detail is perfectly fine. But once you have it on paper, you see what is still missing. All right, how do we use direction? So ideally, we keep it accessible. As I said, put it on walls. And the alternative is you use it in reviews to reinforce your direction. You remind people in reviews that, well, the reasons why I'd expect you guys to, make a step back. If you review a level and it doesn't have flanking routes, but wait a second, your direction was to have at least 1 to 3 flanking routes in your level, then you can say, hey, my feedback for this level is to have 1 to 3 flanking routes. Can the level designer then complain about, oh my God, this is a brand new thing? No, he can't. He's like, oh, damn it, I forgot about the flanking routes. Fair enough, let's take care of that feedback. However, it happened to me a lot in the past too, that I start making reviews and, wait a second, I spot a pattern in my direction or my feedback, and it contradicts or expands the direction. It's fair enough. We're now reviewing the level, we're in a practical field. Now it's time to say, you know what, I completely forgot about the cover distance, the max cover distance as a direction. Let's add it to the list. Or I completely forgot about the direction for sidelines. It's totally fair to go to your team, hey, I'm not a complete wonder boy. Let's add this to our direction because I keep giving this feedback. We all agree with it. Let's not argue too much about it. Let's adjust it. That's fine. That's okay. Let's just not reinvent the wheel every week. So yeah, we kind of have to realize that game development is iterative. If you make a game like FarCry with over 1,000 people in over 5 years, it's so complex. We cannot have the magic formula at the very beginning. We have a design document, we dump 1,000 drones in it, and at the end we have a perfect game. Things change a lot during this time. So we have to embrace it at some time, but please in limits. I got PTSD about that. All right, some additional thoughts. You can make a great direction about bad design, and you can make a bad direction about great design. However, a good direction can reveal bad design. I'll give you an example. I was asked to look into a subsection of a game. I'm not going to reveal what it is, but everybody said this is a mess. This is horrible, doesn't work. And I started to look at it and I asked for the direction. Surprised, there was no direction. There was just a design. Then I started to establish a direction, started to establish basic rules of how to apply or connect rooms and how to establish transitions between the different types of spaces. And it suddenly revealed that the design was actually horrible, and the design was actually set a great new foundation. And everybody was like super happy, and we adjusted the design, and it was a good game. Now, there's a process called DNA. Essentially, it further defines what the game is and what it is not, because a direction, again, is not a detailed design document for every little bits and piece. It still has room for interpretation. This is fine, this is okay. We want to be surrounded by creative people and not, again, drones. But the DNA can help, especially if the direction is a bit more loose, the division is a bit more loose. But I'm not very familiar with the DNA process. That's the reason why it's not part of this presentation. But if everybody's interested in it, Google it, have a look around. There's some really cool presentations about that. I think Love, Death, and Robots, the guy who worked on that or established it, had a good presentation about that. And again, we can create direction for little things. We can create it for a level, art direction, game, and so on. This methodology which I presented works for all those elements. Quick summary. We establish a consistent, The direction establishes consistency within team and the product. We base it on a practical experience and application. And the feedback unites the direction as a whole, so we actually not contradict ourselves and we create an incoherent mess. All right, a quick summary of all what I just talked about, and some additional points. So we have our vision, which is our base idea and spark. We have our pillars, which is our composition, and our direction, which is the meat on the bone, to stay on the little body analogy. So our vision is our foundation, said it many times. Here's our skeleton, which needs the meat on the bone, of course, to have a full-fleshed body or product. And then we have direction as a guideline. It's not a hard rule, typically, a direction. You can break direction with purpose, but please do me the favor, first master it before you break it, and not the way around. It's very expensive. Vision is an emotional carrier. The pillars are useful. It's a useful tool for developers to test the ideas against the product to see if it actually fits. I want to give you a good example. I worked on a game where we worked on character animations, but we never established what our character actually is. So suddenly, if we now wanted to make a samurai attack and a headbutt, we couldn't make a decision because we never established clear pillars what we're actually creating here. That was eye-opening. And again, direction is practical, has to be applicable by the people who sit in the trenches and make the game. And all of that together creates consistency. We don't want to have a game where the UI doesn't match to the levels and the level doesn't fit to the art and the game design is all over the place. We all know those games, but let's keep it to ourselves because we want to create something consistent. All right. The one thing, and this is a little bit of a personal pet peeve, I like the idea of empowerment, but simmer down our horses. For me, a well-done vision, pillars, and direction reduces the workload for director and leads. I don't want to be in reviews every hour and meetings every hour. I like to be lazy. That's kind of a goal for me. I like to actually let the people drive the production of the game, and I just create the direction, adjust it here and there, a few little meetings here and there. It's kind of cool. It reduces the amount of hand-holding which we have to do. We have to do less micromanaging. The better we do this job, the less we are these dictators overshadowing all the production and driving everybody nuts and everybody quits. That's not cool. We don't like that. My goal is to be bored. I like to disappear for 4 weeks and nobody notices it. Don't tell Tom, but I like to be gone for a while and be bored because I had the best idea about games when I was bored. When I run from meeting to meeting and just barely have time to pee in between, I don't have good ideas. I can't be a good leader. That doesn't work very well. Being bored is one of the most important goals for me personally. Now, unfortunately, we have to talk about some negative things, of course, at the end, just to set the mood. Micromanagement, as I said, we don't want micromanagement because if we want to surround by drones, we wouldn't be in this industry, or a very different type. It erodes all the trust and honesty we establish. We all get this big speech at the beginning of an interview, and then we have all the freedom in the world, and then we're being micromanaged. That's not, no. Again, if you constantly change it, nobody can remember. If you change the 3 pillars of your game every week, nobody remembers it, even if you have 3. And the direction shouldn't change just every time you watch a new movie. The other bane is, a lot of times we have leaders in higher position which are not that experienced. They believe they have the experience, they believe they're the coolest guys on the planet, but essentially they only operate based on their own opinion, not on their actual experience. And they lack the honesty to say, you know what, this is an opinion and this is actually feedback based on my experience. Happens many, many times. Now, very importantly, just because people got crazy maybe about the idea of empowerment, empowerment doesn't mean a free-for-all. We still have a vision, pillars, and a direction. It doesn't mean we now go all nuts about, hey, let's make a game what we want to. No, this is not the goal. We still work together and just agree on this kind of contract. But it's not a free-for-all. And a lot of it comes from insecurity. We have all our demons all around, but insecurity is one of the biggest banes we have in leadership positions. When people push things down to the agenda and then start becoming dictators and insecurity and micromanage and all these kind of things, because there's some deep-rooted insecurity. And you can't defeat insecurity by gaslighting yourself. That doesn't work either. Some people are convinced about that, but no, it doesn't work that way. And therefore, you need to be in the business for quite a while, or you need to be surrounded by really good people you can trust, or be in a safe environment. But if you push in a corner, it doesn't work. All right. Shamelessly promoting my book again and my YouTube channel. So if you have any questions, please now make pictures, buy the book next year. If you have any questions, let's go. Yeah, I'm done. Yes, back there. I mean, there are many different ways how to approach it. In my experience, you first have an idea for a game before you try to establish the tools which are useful later on. I know some people start liking to work starting with a pillar and then base their vision on it. But ultimately, even if you flip the process around, the usefulness of the pillars is still that developers can apply their ideas or can check their ideas against the pillars. And if that matches, it's all good. I like to work this way. This is not a hard rule. For me, the vision is the foundation, and the pillars are based on it. Like I built my pillars on my foundation for my temple, and the roof is the direction. Horrible analogy, but that's how I like to work. There's also a picture in my head. You can say the vision is the consciousness, and then your pillars is your skeleton, and then comes the meat. So yeah, I can come up with more analogy which works in my head, but I know some people like to have their vision as individual words, and you can say these are pillars. The problem, what I often see is that if I work the way around, it's difficult to make them practical, because the vision is not a practical tool. It's something to inspire people, but in the day-to-day business of when I'm sitting at my desk and design my level, I don't know how often I remembered about the vision, but hopefully I'm remembered about the pillars. That's just the usefulness which I typically apply to that tool. Yes, in the middle, please. If the team doesn't understand the pillars or direction, is that correct? Well, if they don't agree or don't understand it, it's quite similar. Ideally, I'd like to have a chat with them and try to clarify it. In most cases, it's actually my fault that I didn't make the pillars very clear, or that my vision potentially was not inspiring enough. If the pillars are not making anyone excited in the room, or are useless, or that people don't follow them, therefore, very likely my vision was not inspiring to begin with, or I set up horrible. If they got inspired by the vision, but ignore the pillars, and I probably set up the wrong pillars. Again, that comes back to the reasons why I like that order. But if people are not inspired by your vision, you have a bad vision. Because the people who pay you, the people who make the game, and if it stops there to get inspiring your vision, you don't have a good vision. And then comes the rest. If they don't understand it, I probably didn't explain it well enough. Often things fall between the gaps because not everybody's a native speaker, or I have the wrong team for the wrong product, or the way around. Happens in all those ways, but yeah. Any other question? Yes. I don't know if Crysis had pillars. The problem is, well, you spotted a problem. The other problem was, I don't remember the 9 pillars of this game I worked on, because there were 9 freaking pillars. I remember one of them was wacky. Wacky, like, brrr. It didn't help, but it's the only one I remembered because it was not helping, maybe. I don't know. I really don't remember horrible pillars, because they were probably bad for a reason. I don't remember them for a reason. That's unfortunately the reality. And maybe some of the pillars were very immersive and synergy and these kind of things. They don't help much. But other bad pillars were accessibility, fun, and I think in one case it was make money, actually. So the 3 pillars that you saw in the example, they were from games, but I can't tell you from which ones. Sorry. Probably in the next iteration, I will add some more examples. The problem is I had to squeeze it down to 40 minutes, and I tried to squeeze in some examples here and there. I don't have out of the stand right now a good example for vision, but I worked on games which used pillars like purpose, freedom, dread was a good one too. I like emotional words as pillars sometimes. We had shock and awe once as a pillar. But the one I probably remember the most was dread. That actually was in FarCry Primal. We worked on the Great Hunts. And one of the Great Hunts had the pillar dread as one of the emotional pillars. And that was still really cool because everybody in the room understood what to do. The audio designer went out of the room and came up with a really cool idea that if the saber-toothed tiger comes close, all the environment stops. The level designer had a really cool ideas how to make this creature appear, that it only shows up at night. The artist made some really spooky lighting and with torches, and we made sure that once this whole saber-toothed tiger appears, it comes out of the darkness. We attached some particle effect. It was really, really spooky. The thing is, we were so short on time, we never talked to each other. But because everybody understood the word dread, it all fitted together when it came together. We barely had to do any iterations. So that was a really, really good example of how to work with a pillar. And that was just one. The rest came from the main game, so we didn't have to have too many pillars for our own sub-element of it. And if you look good direction, check my YouTube channel. There's a lot of stuff. Yes? If your vision doesn't inspire the team anymore mid-production, right? My first step typically is then to go a bit into myself or talk with the director group. What happened with the vision? Maybe I've not done actually the process of gauging our feedback against the vision or checked this kind of step, what I said about gauging it against it. I probably have not done that very well. If then the vision becomes more boring because we have to cut so many features that the vision becomes dull, that's often a reality as well, I need to find new ways to spark the idea. Potentially I have to change the vision. Maybe I have to manage expectations, be honest and talk to the team, work with them. But ultimately, there's a time in production where there's no point of return. Typically around alpha, beta, you can't go back anymore. And depending on how much money is behind the product, and we can't solve it with the team, we can't resolve it by adjusting the vision, we can't resolve it by managing the expectations. At some point, we have to suck it up and bring it out, at least so we can finish the product. Because a canceled product at that stage is way too expensive nowadays. And not every company can afford that. That's the sad reality, but I'd rather be honest about this with the team than the way around and just keep lying to them, because that erodes all the trust I have. Or the trust they have in me, or the team. Anything else? Yes? Did you ask if you had a lot of diverse team to come up with a widely inspiring vision? In my experience, I like to have a diverse cast to exactly achieve this. But I also think about my target audience. If my target audience is meant to be diverse because I want to sell 20 million copies, then I probably should have a larger audience. Also in my vision creating team. I mean, I need to have a diverse team to represent 20 million sold copies. If I want to sell 20 million copies and I'm surrounded by only white straight males, it's difficult to find those 20 million people to actually buy your game. So I like to have a diverse cast just exactly for that reason, to mirror essentially the target audience. You mean if I have a lot of contradictory ideas at the beginning? Okay, if I have too much noise early on during the production, yeah, go ahead. If you have too much noise, too much different ideas which contradict each other in the early stages, reduce the number. Design by committee rarely works. Surround yourself by 2-3 maybe people to create a base foundation. It's difficult to create a cool vision with more than 2-3, maybe 5 people. You get too much noise in the room. At least establish the core of your vision. Maybe then you can elaborate it further. There's reasons why I always said leave room for the other developers. 2-3 people can come up with a cool idea. But if it doesn't leave enough room, then the other diverse ideas, maybe contradictory ideas, don't find their own self-fulfilling goals in their own game. On the other hand, if it's too contradictory, like if one person wants to make a multiplayer first-person shooter and the other one want to make a match 3, there's probably a mismatch in the company or in the hiring process. But if it's just contradictory ideas within the same field, a lot of it can be done by compartmentalizing it. For example, one team creates the direction for the overarching game with a lot of room. Then the other group works in the art direction, which still fits to it, but there's enough room to it for the art direction to really find their own fulfilling goal. The level design direction finds their whole goal. And then you basically compartmentalize it and build it in sub-elements. That's another good idea. That's why I said multiple times, these practices work for the totality of your game, your overall creative vision for the game, but also for the subparts like the level design direction, the game direction, the art direction, tech direction, whatever is out there. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any further questions? Are we hungry? I found the magic word. All right. Thank you so much. Good lunch.